What are you going to do? I'm going to be a tuba soloist. And the usual. A what? What are you going to do for a living?
It's fun.
It's a riot.
Yeah.
I can tell you where I really bit in. And about 6 or 7 weeks into playing, I turned 9 over the summer, my mom came in and ripped the Rubank book up, threw it out, and several words came out of her mouth about, I don't want to hear this whole note and half note garbage anymore. And she stormed off and went to Schmidt Music, the big sheet music center in Minneapolis. And she came back with one solo from each drawer of the tuba drawer at Schmidt Music.
Wow.
One of each. I owned the Von Williams Tuba Concerto, the Hindemith Tuba Sonata at the age of 9.
Wow.
And came in and said, well, here are all the tuba solos that I could find, which were all of them that were available at the time at Schmidt Music.
Whoa.
And then she bought a whole bunch of piano vocal books.
All this encouragement that you've gotten, plus you have the abilities and the skills and capabilities, but you have no inhibitions. There's a freedom in your household. There's a variety of musical exposure. You've been exposed to classical now and some jazz, and
a lot of big band music.
And there's always a fun element of it. This is just my life. This is what I enjoy.
It wasn't until I got to college that anybody ever told me what the real role of a tuba was. And I had met John Painter at Interlochen, and I had come down and played a solo with the North Shore Concert Band my senior year in high school.
Wow.
And won the John B. Painter Scholarship, which was I think it was $500 and a chance to play with North Shore.
Wow.
My main influence was Arnold Jacobs, who was the tuba player in the Chicago Symphony for 44 years. And so I would go on Saturdays and go downtown and study with him. Jacobs didn't teach at any university.
Right.
He taught in his studio at the Fine Arts Building,
Oh,
privately.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was a typical college kid. I was taking a lot of science and then all the music, and singing in choirs and playing in brass quintets and in John's Symphonic Wind Ensemble, and playing in Victor Yampolsky's Symphony Orchestra, and playing the Chicago Civic Orchestra downtown, and taking lessons with Mr. Jacobs, and going to Chicago Symphony concerts every week.
Wow.
And went to school there for 2 years. And I wasn't getting everything that I needed. From the standpoint of tuba. So I put out the feelers, and I was either going to go to Boston University to study with Sam Palafian, or I was going to go to ASU, Arizona State, and study with Dan Parentoni. I just wanted to go somewhere and practice and really hone it down, and ASU offered that. So that was my junior year, and then May 5th or 6th, there was a Marine Band audition, and I went and I won. I was 19. It was the beginning of the professional phase and the end of the student.
So this is the U.S. Marine Band.
President's on United States Marine Band.
We begin our ceremony with a concert performed by the President's Own United States Marine Band. The band opens with a march composed by Fred Jewell entitled Quality Plus.
The big one in Washington, D.C. That everybody goes, whoa.
Colonel John Bourgeois was the director, and I started there in 1989.
Wow, and 19 years old. Incredible.
They gave me more than 200 opportunities to stand in front of that group in 4 years and work as a soloist.
Wow.
And work as a soloist in every venue that they played, from Wolf Trap to the concert stages all over America, to the White House, to Sylvan Theater at the Washington Monument, to the Capitol steps. As much and as often as I wanted, they let me stand in front.
Wow.
And people that play in a professional orchestra get a chance maybe once, possibly twice in a career to stand up in front of their own orchestra. And inside of 4 years, I So having had all the experience that I had prior to that, and then having a platform for it in a professional setting, gave me the opportunity to hone the rest, not the tuba playing skills, but the audience engagement skills, and get rid of any issues with nerves, or, in other words, change the perspective from being, oh, there's all this pressure on me to be the soloist, to, I can't wait to get out there because it's my 12 minutes. What are you going to do? I'm going to be a tuba soloist. And the usual, a what? What are you going to do for a living?
Unbelievable.
And that's just playing around and experimenting and finding out the different types of things that you can do. And I discovered those things because I wasn't being limited by instruction from others or from my own thinking. I was just trying to find ways to make interesting sounds on the instrument.
Yeah.
There was nobody else playing the instrument, and my band director asked me if I would be willing to do it, and I said, sure, absolutely. And at a very early age, by virtue of the demands and requests of my mom, was playing melodies on it, melodies that any other instrument can play. The notion that this instrument is limited by itself is a false one. tuba is a friendly instrument. Because of the sound that it makes, it's very easy to play really beautiful melodies in a way that allows people to warm to it because of its tone quality. It's easy to get next to, and it is probably one of the easiest instruments to start on because most people are used to making that sound at that age for playing with their cars and trucks. And that's really all buzzing your lips is.
Yeah. Yep.
And we all know how to go, and all it is a matter of actually controlling that a little bit more.
Right.
And then putting that in front of a mouthpiece.
Yep. Wow.
And learning and just getting used to the feeling. And in the beginning, because you're vibrating so much at your lips, your nose is going to tickle, your face is going to tickle, it might even itch a little bit. I mean, after a while, that's part of the reason I play this instrument. It feels good.
I like the feeling.
I do.
Yes.
I do like the feeling.
Oh, okay.
And the main thing to remember about playing the instrument is that just because it's so large looking and seemingly so that it requires so much effort to play, that it doesn't. It's really like sighing into the instrument. It really is no more than that.
Yep. So if we were starting out to play this instrument, let's say I'm a fifth grader and I walk into the band and the band director says, well, we have all of these choices. We have clarinets, flutes, and trumpets and trombones and those kinds of things, but I think you might be suited to play a tuba. Why don't you show us a few of the different kinds of sounds that you can make out of tubas that nobody has probably ever thought about?
Well, I think the best way to draw an association with this instrument is to bring it into the world of singing. So we all have heard sopranos, which is the highest voice, and then as we go down through the lower voices in terms of alto, which is the lower female voice, and then tenor, and of course we all know the three tenors, Pavarotti and Domingo and Carreras, very famous singers, male singers, and then baritones, which is sort of the mid to lower voice in the singing voice, and then the bass voice. Probably the most famous bass singer from nearly a century ago in the world of classical music as well as Broadway music was Paul Robeson, a wonderful African-American singer who made the role in Jerome Kern's musical Showboat famous for the signature tune of that musical, which is Old Man River. So I'm going to play parts of Old Man River, and I'm going to play them where Mr. Robeson would have sung them. Then I'm going to play that even lower to give you an idea of how the instrument sounds quite low, and then I'm going to play up in the mid-range when I play at the bridge, just to give you a chance to hear sort of the different types of sounds that the instrument can make, but in the context of a nice melody.
Great.
And now much lower. And now sort of the mid to upper range when we go to the bridge. And now we're back to where he sang at the beginning.
Wonderful. Wow.
Thank you.
Now I'm convinced that not everything you do is lips and legitimate sounds. You were doing things with harmonics and
Yeah.
and you were actually humming into the horn,
Yep.
doing different pitches.
Yep.
It would be fun to explore that a little bit.
I've learned a piece of music that is originally written for the violin. And the goal of this is to, in the context of the melody, is to also introduce the sound of a songbird. The title of the piece is called The Hot Canary. And every couple of notes, you're supposed to make a sound like a bird, like a canary,
Okay.
in the context of a melody. And so I learned to do this on the instrument because one of the neat things about the tuba is that it's got an extraordinarily wide range, almost as big as the piano. But you can make some really interesting sounds with it. So the little melody that goes with it, that is this piece, The Hot Canary, sounds like this.
That is so wild.
So and those notes I was playing extremely high, very high, not normal for the instrument.
Now that's a regular tone that you're using?
Sure, it's the E flat, which is the key of this instrument, but
Yeah.
played very high. So the fundamental of the horn is there. And those are the notes I'm playing.
Wow.
But outside of an ensemble or in front of an ensemble, this instrument is no different than a trumpet or a French horn
So in
or a
essence,
euphonium. It's just the bigger one.
it's limited by what people think about it being limited.
Every youngster in the world knows how to do this, especially ones that play with cars and trucks.
Okay.
Because it's two things. It's buzzing the lips
Yeah.
and it's singing at the same time.
Hmm.
And especially little boys, every little boy I know play. Playing with their cars and trucks, shifting
Yep.
gears like it's a truck.
Okay.
And that's really all I'm doing. That's
All right.
really all I'm doing when I'm playing. I'm playing a note and singing another. And it makes a chord. And when it's perfectly in tune, then it rings harmonics. So it sounds like a whole chord. It sounds
Yes.
like more than one person playing. And one of the things that you can do, I mean, it has a place in contemporary music for an effect, for creating a different color, a different timbre, a different style of sound.
Sure.
But what I've done with it is tried to make some fun with it. So you can play chords. Or you could play a piece of music.
That was unbelievable. I've never heard it quite played that way before, but when you're a soloist, I guess you have to figure out all kinds of ways to do things to provide accompaniment.
Sure.
Where are my trumpet players in here? Do you ever put a tuba mouthpiece to your mouth and go like, because it doesn't feel good. You're like, what did the... I could put a pontoon boat in here. Where are the tuba players? Do you ever put a trumpet mouthpiece to your mouth and go, no. No wonder those guys miss notes all the time, right? Doesn't feel right.
It's amazing to me because as a youngster playing in a band and talking to kids who played the horn, there was always a concept, a feeling, an attitude that said, well, tuba players can't play high.
Right.
Yeah. So, if you
Not true.
you stick a trumpet mouthpiece in your tuba, you could play high, but if you take, let's take a look at that mouthpiece that you have. If you take that kind of mouthpiece, let's just zoom in and take a look at the front of it. If you point it down a little bit so we can see the inside, the size of that compared to the size of your lips, okay, it's a pretty big mouthpiece. So to be able to get a really high sound out of that, what's required of what we call your embouchure?
Sure. What's required of my embouchure to play in that range is the same thing that would be required of a trumpet player to play in their mid-range.
Okay.
I'm playing in the mid-range of a trumpet. The only difference is that a trumpet player's mouthpiece anchors their embouchure quite narrowly inside here,
Yeah.
and my mouthpiece anchors it out here. So what I've had to learn to do is to be able to focus the vibration or the buzz, that, only in the center of my chops without having the additional help of being anchored there by the mouthpiece. And that just takes practice.
Okay. So you're actually only letting the center of your embouchure vibrate
That's correct.
in a very small place. Okay. So let's explore the buzz a little bit, because I know this can be for young people watching what's the possibilities with the horn. And the way you start on an instrument is that you typically would take the mouthpiece and learn how to make a sound. So
Right.
you want to show us that?
Sure, absolutely. One of the great things about buzzing a mouthpiece is that you don't have to, you can play little melodies on it without having to, in the very beginning, know exactly which fingering to put down. You can buzz melodies and use your ear to create the pitches and get some tone. So, you can buzz all over the place, and you can buzz all sorts of things.
So you don't even need a horn.
Not if you want to sound like this. No.
One thing that I get, Pat, is that when you play a tuba, I think it probably requires a lot of air.
It does. A lot of hot air.
Yeah.
It requires more air than most of us are used to blowing, but it does not require that you have to be blowing in a forceful way, in that sort of fashion. It's an enormous amount of air, but it's a lot of air moving fairly slowly and not forcefully. So when I'm playing, if I were to blow and then buzz and then play my horn,
Yeah.
So it's about how it feels to play the instrument actually quite loud.
Wow.
So to play on the instrument then requires just about the same amount of air as that.
Uh-huh.
So it's not such a forceful is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
And most, especially, and the perspective is different.
Yeah.
I'm an adult,
Uh-huh.
arguably, and somebody watching me that's a beginner, someone in the 5th grade, for example, someone 9 or 10 years old,
Yeah.
has a different perspective. They're looking at an adult moving a lot of air, and
Sure.
it seems to be an enormous amount. But when I started, nobody really showed me exactly how to blow, and I just was trying to make sound. So it felt more to me like, instead of that I was blowing forcefully, more like I was sighing into the instrument, sort of. when I'm playing. And that's
Okay.
what it feels like. It's actually not an athletic endeavor. It feels very relaxing.
Sure.
Very relaxing to play into the instrument.
Well, you're a pretty big guy now, so you have a big set of lungs, and you've developed them over many, many years of playing, and that's part of the training of being an instrument, a wind instrument player, is to be able to develop your lungs in such a way that you can take in vast amounts of air. But as a young person just starting out, I know it's always one of the most difficult things that we seem to have to get kids to understand about taking a deep breath and filling those lungs so that you can use all the air that's inside. So if you were to teach a fifth grader how to do that, well, what would you say to them?
I would start with just, the first thing I would talk about is the shape that we need to be in to be able to bring in a larger quantity of air than we would for normal activity, a normal activity like talking, for example.
Yeah.
And we know that in the context of talking that we don't have to take in that much of our lung capacity. So if we look at our lung capacity from 0% to 100%, the first 10% is what's called static air. That's air that stays in our lungs to keep our lungs in the right shape. When that air goes away, it's called a collapsed lung. You have to go to the doctor. Don't ask a drummer because they can't find the 11 on the dial. All right. Then from 10 to 20 or 25% of our lung capacity. So 10 to 15% of our total capacity, but in the range of 10 to 25%, is the air that we use for normal everyday activity, for eating pizza and for playing Nintendo or Xbox or showering or talking. And we know that that's true, that it's not an enormous amount of our capacity, because when we're speaking to somebody, like I'm talking to you now, I don't have to take a moment and say, excuse me just for 1 second, Larry. So as I was saying, I don't have to take a break to get that air in. It's such a small amount of my lung capacity. When we're playing a brass instrument of any sort, we should really hopefully start at the point at which we're full for talking, so right around 20 to 25% of our lung capacity, and move up till we're comfortably full, which, depending on how comfortable we are with these muscles here in terms of how they stretch, dictates how full that is. It might be 80%, it might be as much as 95%.
Okay.
Full. So it's a much larger quantity and over a greater range of motion. So the first thing that I want to do, since I'm going to bring in more air than I am for talking, is get everybody in the right shape so that we can get that amount of air in quickly.
Okay.
And there are areas that we talk about when we do this. A lot of people do geographic pedagogy. They talk about breathing in terms of 4 geographic areas: the position of the jaw, position of the tongue, our throat, and the muscles that enclose our lungs. And for me, that's too complicated for an adult, let alone a fifth grader.
Yeah, indeed.
And when we draw geographic attention to parts of our body that we're not used to regulating on a conscious level, we tend to overregulate. So instead, I like to do with everybody actually is introduce a shortcut, a way of thinking something that will cause our body to go to the right shape. So if we think just about where the air is going to pass when it goes to our lungs, it's going to come in over our lips, into our mouth, down our throat, and into our lungs. We can control that area of our body by thinking about the position of our jaw and our tongue. It's still, for me, 2 steps removed from making music, which is why we're doing this.
Right.
So I like to draw attention to how that area feels by having people say words. So the first thing I would have people say is to say E, just to get a feeling of what it's like in this area of our body. E, E. Say E, E. Say E like me, E. And then I would have them go to a much more open position, a much more uniformly open position for taking air in, which I would consider to be the latter part of the word whoa, whoa, or oh. A very open, uniformly open shape through which the air can pass.
Yep.
So once we got from E to O and then said them back to back, E, O, and felt the drop and felt what that feels like to be in that position, then my next request is that every time we take a breath, we're in that position, like we're saying, whoa, backwards. When we breathe in. So our shape is right. So we've eliminated any sort of restriction so that the air can get into our lungs.
Yep.
So that's the first part, is to get to the right shape. Then, in order to make sure that we're breathing over a greater range of motion than what's normal, which is 10 to 25% of our lung capacity, or 15% of our total, I would just time the breathing. So I would ask whatever individuals were with me to breathe for a certain number of counts. So breathe in for 4 counts and out for 4 counts. And as a part of that breath, make sure that the shape was right. So the first form of breathing is shape, which is whoa or o. And then that the breath be constant. So we're not holding our breath when we're full or when we're empty. And that the breath be even. So those are the first 3 parts of form for a good breath.
Okay.
And the breath be even. Most people don't breathe like that. When they know that they have to take in a lot of air, they take in most of it right away. Instead of breathing evenly, which is why we would do it to a count. So if I was with a student, and we were going to do that, we'd work on the shape first, which is O or whoa, and then we would go for a certain number of counts, making sure that the second 2 parts of form for breathing were correct, which is that it's constant and that it's even. So I would breathe in for, let's just say, 4 counts. And more often than not, with the attention being drawn to shape, and the goal, the external goal being a timed one, with an emphasis on constancy and evenness, everything else in terms of the rest of the geography, which is our throat and our chest muscles, which is the part that encloses our lungs, which will either limits the amount that our lungs can expand, therefore limiting the amount of air that we can bring in, takes care of itself. Because we can only think of one thing at any given moment. Only one thing at a time. We can't think of a 4 when we're thinking of a 3. It's impossible. That's brain physiology. That's the way our mind works. So if I've supplanted all information about physiology and geography in terms of taking a breath with one thing, which is whoa or oh, and then have people do it to an external goal, which is a timed one for breathing, the breath usually takes care of itself. Usually. If it doesn't, we focus then again on the form. Always on the form. So make sure it's even. In other words, if somebody's breathing in and they're really tight, we go back to saying, no, we need to breathe evenly for 4 counts. If we have to slow it down, then we slow it down.
My observation of young people when they're 5th grade and you say take a deep breath, without going through what you just did, is that they would do something and take in a short, shallow breath and lift their shoulders and try and take in breath. But in your case, I was concentrating on your abdomen to see what occurred, and I really couldn't see a whole lot of anything going on. I mean, so obviously your lungs must have been filling, but I didn't see, anything in the stomach happening. I didn't see.
Oh, it's definitely moving.
It's filling.
It's moving here. It's even moving a little bit in my shoulders, but it's not it's not a big athletic endeavor. And here's the real secret to taking a breath for playing a brass instrument. Breathing between the areas of 20% of our capacity up to 90 to 95% of our capacity is not something that we have to learn to do. We already know how to do it. We do it now as adults when we sleep, and we all did it when we were born. If you have an infant, a baby lying on their back in their crib, sleeping, their belly will move, their chest will move, their shoulders will move, even over here on the sides will move, because that's where the lungs are. And they're breathing in a much greater range because at that stage of life we're growing and we need more oxygen to be able to become adults. And so we breathe in a method, in a style that is just like playing a brass instrument.
Every once in a while, a composer names a piece that's to be descriptive of what's happening in the composition. And I always describe this piece as this is a song about an insect. And when this composer wrote this piece for the instrument that it was originally for, he chose the violin. And in choosing so, the sound was descriptive of an insect, a small animal that flies through the air. So I want you to use your imagination now, playing this on the tuba. I'm a man of ample size. So this is the largest one of these types of insects that you've ever seen. Now when I do this shtick every time I do this piece, and I was doing it for kids one time, and there was a little kid in the front row with his buddies, And this kid absolutely knew for sure, he thought he knew what this piece was. And he elbows his friend and he goes, he's going to play the glowworm. I mean, I can see tapeworm. Or maybe inchworm. This is the flight of the bumblebee.